I quickly scanned the room, trying to take in absolutely everything I could about the bizarre assembly in front of me. Necromancy, at least as I understood it, was something far, far beyond, well, my understanding. So, instead of basing this on an understanding of some eldritch art, I tried to piece together how this would work from an assembly line process. What is the most efficient way that things would be assembled here? Quickly ascertaining the nature of the room, the way this master assembly works, I scrambled my way across the chamber. Quickly ducking between my comrades, I tipped my hat to the nearby skeletons, hoping that they too recognize the merchant's privilege. I bounced off the ground, picking up pace, rolling into a large rotund ball. I used the momentum to carry myself forwards. Traveling directly beneath Master Assembly, I got a closer look at the thing.
From what was described later, the assembly seemed to apparently be multiple skeletons almost stacked together inside of this large single chandelier surface. Multiple of the golden skulls on the top and around it seemed to speak to each other in different voices. And beneath, a large collections of bones clung to each other, forming a cage of bone that was just out of sight beneath the dangling curtains. Taking advantage of the slight moment of attention that Yayo seemed to grab, I moved as quick as I could off in this direction, finding myself just starting to sprint across the very edge of the room, clicking to the dark. I found myself very slowly making progress down and through, and as I looked up, I noticed multiple railways taking a path through. It seems this was the end of one. The thing was stuck on these railways, so as long as I clung and stayed down, I had hoped it would not be able to reach me. However, moments later, I noticed that both of the skeletons sort of standing at the idol began to chase us as we started moving across. One directly went for Yayo first. Very swiftly, the skeleton almost brought up its arms and then brought them down just as quick, slamming two held, clenched, bony fists down right on top of Yayo's head, smashing her hat down and indenting it downwards for a moment. It seemed I was next as another one began chasing down the hall. I kept ahead of it, but it slowly and surely made its way towards me, all the while holding out a hand as if to stop me.
Staring down, I saw that Yayo ran ahead without letting me know any sort of plan or action that we should be doing. So I did the next best thing, and I followed her. Just shy of the skeleton, I curse as I push forward, kick the skeleton's shins, trying to trip it at least slow it down.
I was already exhausted before we even arrived in this room. Spent all the rage that burned within me on trying to deal with that blob, and was already contemplating what we could do here when we were already so tired. And then I realized that we did still have a job to do. The idea that this thing was turning my kin into endless, tireless workers made me feel nauseous. And then I noticed one of the other bodies that we'd found across of our fellow Goloins near to the entrance, and so I decided to investigate.
Moving across the way, Garchinus found himself closer to that body. Peeling it back, pulling away the oily layers of preserving paper, Garchinus saw a face, rather fresh. A young, dead Goloin sat within sight of this singular body bag. Staring straight up with empty eyes, it sort of looked back in Garchinus' direction. It sat at the very end, honestly collected, probably mere moments before our arrival. Inside was a book.
The other corpses we had encountered on the way here, while profoundly sad, were ones who had expired longer ago. There was some distancing, but this felt uncomfortably close. All I could do was slip the book into my coat and try not to think about it for now.
The book held like some sort of crumbling oily paper. It seems as though it was not very well protected. You could find details on many scattered pages, but the names seemed to be wiped out. In the future, it could potentially be learned the identity of this book, but for now it seemed as though Garchinus was simply flipping back and forth, trying to find some type of name, some type of symbol, the details inside alluding to a life that he could not know, for he was not here.
I think to myself about the skeleton making process and everything I've seen about them. the one skeleton's ability to hold a knife and stab just like as if it were human, it would make sense that they would keep these personal effects on their bodies so that they could easily equip them with skills that are most inclined towards their natural habits. So I guess the best way to find a weapon is to, I assume, check some more bodies. I approach this body hoping that maybe I'll get lucky and this will be one of the ones that have a sword. Anything that could potentially help me take down these skeletons.
Strege rips open one of the other body bags next to the smaller Goloin. As he pulls it open, a terrible, awful stench pulls out. The smell, barely preserved, of a body starts to reek across the room. A subtle stench that pervades the whole room that was otherwise blocked out by incense and oils that has now begun to spill out into his nose. It reeks. He recoils. Even if there was something inside of that body bag, there is nothing he would be able to find in his current state. And at that very moment, a voice rang out again. One of the golden skulls hanging up in the sky, running on the railway on that thing called Master Assembly. It began to speak out.
Protocol 1, acquire material.
A simple sentence as all of the skeletons began to shift and pull and weave their bodies and pressure on one side. As the railing began to shift and the gear turned, Master Assembly began to shift its body up as hands, skeletal in nature, began to dip down and start to grab and pull on different individual little body bags beneath as it continued to drag its way forward and move up. A number of body bags were collected, pulled into the thing like a gaping maw, until eventually it sweeped over, finding itself directly near, and almost chucking, the arms tossed all of the bodies onto that singular little cart that then ferried it over, shoving in by the two skeletons that pushed it afterwards, bringing it deeper inside into the furnace. One heave, a toss, and an unloading. The smell of burning bodies resonated in the room after that, mixed with oil and a burning sensation that clicked to the nostrils. And finally, the one skeleton that had not engaged in anything completely ignored the affairs of everything going on, instead sorting multiple skulls on this singular table. It seemed to arrange them in different patterns of thickness, size, and otherwise.
I look over at Yayo. Yayo, what's the plan?
Okay, so there are a few target assembly. I exhaled, focusing myself, explaining the process. Right, that should have been my focus. So, I pointed. Over there. You see the furnace?
Yep, got it.
That's the point of vulnerability. There seems to be somebody manning it. I've got a second idea. Do you think you can take care of the guy that's cleaning the bodies?
The one with the heads?
No, that guy's fine. You're doing great.
Are you talking about these guys over here?
No, I hopped up and down, trying to gain as much height as possible. I pointed beyond the furnace. On the far side, a man could barely be seen operating it. That guy's the one. If we take care of the furnace and then get rid of the torsos, they can't make good skeletons.
All right, got it.
As I suddenly moved to the side, I noticed Arcot begin sprinting off in the direction, passing entire just jars hooked up the pipes of blood and water to wash the wounds. I noticed that Arcot, fully sprinting, manages to find herself perfectly positioned right next to the furnace. Peeking over, the bow drawn, I only then noticed the skeleton that was manning it on the other side.
Heaving, I drag my bow out from my back. I am exhausted, tired, but I can still shoot. I take a look at the skeleton. They need their hands to work. I don't need to kill them. I draw my bow back and fire.
With all of her energy, Arcot pulled back a bow, slung it back, and fired an arrow that rang out. The heavy, compact bow of the Goloins, firing almost harshly, causing a snap from the bow as the arrow just sung across the air. It landed and impacted the skeleton with a force that would break bones. And many bones were broken, but the skeleton turned. And as it turned, Arcot could see details that only I could barely perceive from my distance. Multiple ribs inlaid on top of each other, multiple bones in the spine, multiple hands. This amalgam was multiple skeletons in one. It was bulkier, fiercer, and had much more bones to break before it would stop moving.
He's really hurt. It's gonna take a while for me to get to draw another arrow.
You're doing great. Once that one's gone, get rid of all the ribs and rib cages and all this stuff over there. I spun on my heel, trying to set myself and use the momentum. Using Arcot's incredible display of physical prowess, parentheses running across the room, I was deeply inspired to push myself beyond my own personal limits, parentheses, I am not used to moving this much. Contorting my body, I angled a rock picked up from the ground and threw it on the at the skeleton that so rudely compressed my hat.
The rock sung through the air. It hit the skeleton, and with a crack, the skull itself seemed to crack, and it split down and fell to the floor.
Unable to admire my own handiwork, I instead focused on what would be the greatest task of my life. Okay. Thunk! I heroically hid myself under a pile of barrels and boxes, making my way over to a deeper segment of the lab, my eyes spotting a golden, glimmering prize.
With the previous explanation that Yayo gave about some of the things here needing to be interrupted, I don't think I would be able to make my way across the room so effectively. But maybe something over here could be interfered. I glanced over at the glowing, runed pillars surrounded by crystals. I realized that if all of this is part of a system, it's not a particular form of manufacturing I have previously been privy to. Mostly it's been leatherworking and silks, but if there is a system, if you break a gear within the machine, the entire thing falls apart. So, remaining in a practical mode, I scampered over to see what I could tear apart. In any instance where you're working in embroidery, sometimes a stitch goes wrong and the pattern ends up being not what you desired, but it's fine. With a careful eye and knowing exactly what threads to pick, undoing a piece of embroidery is as easy as carving out the right parts. This particular rune looked unpleasant to me, so I removed it first. In the dim green glow as it reduced, it reflected off the shine of my teeth. It was working.
I spent most of our last battle just tossing skeletons into pits and things, and that seemed pretty effective as far as it goes. Not like I have any weapons or any traps to see or anything like that, so I am simply going to do what I have done best so far, and I'm just gonna try to pick up the skeleton and throw it at the thing. I see Gartrinus approach this thing and start delicately carving off pieces of it, and assume this is important enough to destroy. So I simply go over to the skeleton right here, and I wish I had something more eloquent to do other than just throw it full body at this tower.
There was a loud impact, the sound of multiple bones cascading down and then rocks following forward. As I turned around, the room got a whole lot darker all of a sudden.
Oh, that's one down. One more to go.
Oh, excellent work, Stray Gay.
Yeah. Hopefully these things aren't like keeping the skeletons calm or something.
They'll have to grow worried about us eventually. They've underestimated us for too long, Stray Gay.
A head turns, a head that sorts so many other heads. As one of the skeletons looks over, sees the light going dim on one of the pylons, and it turns around, puts its hands on its hip, then goes over to the smallest skull on the table, hefts it in its hand, goes for a running start, and then full body chucks it across the way directly at Stray Gay.
The skeleton that I thought was simply just doing its job, I guess got upset at what we did and started throwing skeletons at me. I don't know.
Right around when the pylon was destroyed, there was a shifting on Master Assembly as its body began to shift its way, moving down the different assembled railings until eventually it found itself in the center. And then there was a click, the body shift, pulling it along, causing the entire chandelier to move up as more bodies pour out of the furnace. It collects them, grabbing a number of the skeletons on the inside as it simply drags them up into its mass. And then it begins shifting and turning around, locking into a new protocol. As the other assembled skeletons began to move, I noticed that one of the pylons had gone down. I still had no weapon to really speak of, but I did start to move my way a bit more towards the direction of these different shelves. Upon one of these shelves, I looked around for what could at least be the biggest object I could find, and holding it in my heft, a rather large bag of some kind seemed to be held on this shelf. As I pulled it down, hefted it over my back, and then tossed it as hard as I could against the other pylon located here. It managed to impact true as it knocked into the pylon and the entire thing shaked for a moment, everything about it slowly shifting down as it dimmed ever so briefly. That should have been enough. Enough for the next person to come by and take the whole thing crumbling down. But before I could even think about calling out to someone else, there's another shift, as across the way, Master Assembly declared one more time,
Protocol 3. Endlessly produce. 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 Produce.
Almost caught in a loop, one of the golden skulls began shouting, yelling produce about 9 times before eventually shifting its body, and it began to move. After grabbing the bodies, completely ignored all in its path, as the skeletons pulled their way forward and then shifted their body weight once more onto the left as they pulled their way back to the circle. As they did so, a number of skeleton bodies just seemed to drop down beneath, all falling down onto the circle as every single golden skull on there began to chant something. A number of glowing runes on the ritual themselves were lit, and it seemed as though every single skeleton that was dropped down beneath slowly began to raise its way up bit by bit until eventually they all stood just as tall as the others.
Hiding under this, trough box? I don't know. I stared back up, seeing the Master Assembly leaving, thankfully not grabbing me. I scramble across the corner here, trying to get a little bit closer to the skeleton. It's a lot more stronger than the others. Maybe killing it would be too hard. I just need to move it out of the way. I use all 4 of my hands and grab onto the spine and pull as hard as I can. Pulling on this skeleton's spine, I drag him back, using the remainder of my movement. All right, Yayo, I got him.
I made myself known under the table. Barely. Hiding in the gloom, I gave a double thumbs up like, good luck, good luck, good luck. Terrified that the fresh army of skeletons would discover my location.
Ducking behind the cabinets, I noticed Yayo reach for something on the table. I couldn't quite see it, but I could hear it when it started talking.
Unhand me, you Goloin!
Oh, no.
I am a great golden skull, and you will not use your tiny little hands to disperse my form! You should know I'm a great wizard in my life, and I will find your head on a chopping block if you do not unhand me in this instance!
In a moment of panic, I quickly reacted. Almost without thinking, I took my greatest possession, something that was handed down through generations, and I stuffed it in his mouth. I silenced him the only way I knew how. I knew how thick and fatty the shroud was. It had traveled with us across the sea, and now, it served a new purpose. Using the moment of silence, I scrambled my way forwards. I positioned myself behind the army of skeletons, hoping that they didn't notice, and then crossing to what appeared to be an administrative desk.
I could not see at the time what Yayo had done to the whisper to silence it so, but as she snuck across the room and got out of my sight, she'd apparently found herself ducked beneath a desk, staring at a journal holding a number of different secrets, inside of which, starting with, was the production log. A recipe and listing of different types of events and other necessary equipment needed for future planning, with a sudden hike as of recent years. As Strege began to grab another box from the shelf, I turned around and looked a bit deeper at these shelves. It seemed I wasn't needed any longer for this, but there must be something. As I pulled open a box, I noticed a number of strange travelogue items inside. A number of things that would be in the pockets of any adventurer or person going out for any sort of needs deep into the wilds. It gave me an idea. If this area was, as I suspected, a depository of items of the deceased, perhaps I'd be able to find some combatant weapon in here. And so I began to search. Moving my way down and around, squeezing between the shelves, I began to try to find something, anything I could use of a weapon for when those skeletons began to move. I found, not, at first I thought due to the wooden carving it might have been a bow or something, but instead it turned out to be a tiny, little walking stick of some kind. Too small for a human's, but all the same, I took it in my hands and wielded it like a small stave. And then I stared off, and instead of approaching, I sort of dodged back, waiting to see what they would do before I committed to fighting any of them. Meanwhile, on the very far end of the room, one of the skeletons looked down at a disassembled skeleton on the floor. It seemed to passively reach down, take the head off of the skeleton's body, stare at it for at least a couple moments, and then it sort of walked its way back up and put it back, replacing the head that was just lost on the table. And then 2 more skeletons brushed past it, knocking it into the table as they made their way and tried to push even further down, both of them sprinting as fast as their bony legs could take them. And then, as if nothing had happened, Master Assembly shifted again, and once more it called out,
Protocol 1, acquire materials.
I scanned the book to the best of my abilities, looking particularly for any segment on green runes, anything that matched the 4 runes I'd observed in the room so far.
Yayo's delvings into the book proved to be fruitful, as she found a listing of the different runes. The text in general was translated to a language that we could all understand, that of the simple paltrak that everyone had picked up. And as she looked, she found inside a listing of multiple runes, the ones of importance, as she glanced from under the table and managed to peek between the skeletal forms. She found runes of binding, rising, and preservance. And on top of that, she'd found another rune, one that was listed on the tower, protection.
Finding the rune of binding in particular to be of interest, I looked for the entry under it. Is this binding as in a physical force? Binding the skeletons together? Or is it binding as in binding to the will of something? I saw the answer that I was looking for. Or, more correctly, the answer that, I lacked the answer that would dissuade my current, course of action. Pocketing the book, I rose from my hiding spot and began to move my way across the room. Seeing Arcot in the distance, currently holding aloft the skeleton that was operating the furnace, I darted outwards, separating myself and placing myself in line of sight just beyond the vague glow of the runes. I hopped up and down, using the light reflecting off of the golden skull to catch Strege's attention. I twist and turn and make a gesture of tossing. It's time to bring that tower down.
Taking the signal, I just grabbed whatever was on the shelf. I hope none of this is important, and I simply chuck it.
I heard a crumbling sound, the sound of another pylon crumbling down and breaking to pieces. A light went dim and the room got even darker, as there was a sudden shivering of the light for a second near Master Assembly as its attention turned.
Seeing the rune in the distance fall to the ground, disarmed, I continued to pick up speed, trying to place as much distance between myself and the army of skeletons behind me. I, again, adapted to the current tactic of movement. Falling to the ground and building up speed by rolling, I angled around the corner and began to move towards Arcot.
As Yayo approached, the large bulky skeleton lifted up a fist and punched straight down into Arcot. A blow that resonated deep, smashing into Arcot's face, causing a large blister and blood to start pulling out from the cheek.
I pull out the golden skull, and as I do, I'm gonna transfer all of my momentum to just Arcot pops up into the air, and I'm gonna just flying kick this dude.
Oh my god!
Like a swirling ball of energy, Yayo rolled in and then leaped up and full body projected herself into the skeleton, swinging out and smashing into its side, causing another few ribs to crack as the skeleton barely managed to maintain its form. Stumbling a bit on one of its bony legs, it sort of balanced itself out very briefly as Yayo landed down. The golden skull pulling itself out from her hand, being lifted away from the actual shroud she carried it in, began speaking once again.
Unhand you, varmint!
Arcot, okay, I've got wonderful news. Okay, hey there, little guy.
What?
Hey, why weren't you part of the skull pile? Why'd you get left out, huh?
They don't appreciate my genius!
Of course! Of course. Correcting myself. I form a huddle with Arcot around me. So, they don't appreciate your genius? How about forming a business partnership with somebody who does?
Skeleton, attacker!
Yeah, that's what I thought. Hey, Arcot. I toss Arcot the skull.
Wait, what?
Listen, if this guy doesn't cooperate, throw him into the furnace.
Wait, what?
Oh, yeah, I guess it is like the Master Assembly said. Toss them into the pile, right?
Wait, this isn't allowed? This isn't an option?
Overhearing in the very distance the screaming, it seemed that they had encountered the whisper and pulled it out. After a very brief discussion, it seemed to shift itself very slightly, and then, finally, capitulating.
Oh, yes, okay. I am capable of assisting you.
Ah, that's nice.
That's great.
Mimicry of a golden statue of a skull shifting, its mouth moving, and beneath it, actual flesh of the whisper shifting around and projecting the voice as it spoke to Arcot in whatever tone it needed in order to be preserved.
I will tell you everything you need to know.
Can you make the skeleton stop killing us first?
Now. I don't tell the skeletons what to do. I make them. I'm a maker, not a doer.
Oh, okay. Well, you're a maker, not a doer, huh?
Well, make these skeletons not do things.
All skeletons are programmed at the very basic level to always follow the wills of the Lich.
Yeah, but what if they followed your will instead?
I am not the Lich.
You have no aspirations? You're just happy being a middle manager? Are you kidding me? I thought you said you were a maker. Make some decisions.
I am a maker. I'm a maker. I do things.
This is getting nowhere.
No. I think this is going everywhere. I think we're really getting through to him.
I'll give it a try right now.
The whisper seemed to go silent for a moment, until eventually it shifted, its skull moved, and then, with an uncanny ability, it spoke again.
Skeleton, move down immediately. Attack the other skeletons upon my command.
A chill runs down the spine of the Goloins. A voice booming, commanding, a familiar one. That of Grand Wizard Varanus, the one that spoke to us. The Lich's voice, perfectly mimicked by the whisper. No doubt, grown in its proximity to the Lich, it knew the voice well. The skeleton began to shift, stopping in its bulky mass, turning and moving its way down.
Oh my god, you are a doer.
I'm a doer, I make things.
As the other skeleton began marching down, the others did not wait. As beginning to move around, they all started to march down and move in the direction of Strege and others. A number began heading to attempt around the corner to attack him, but some did find their way moving down the very aisles I was sitting at. As it began marching slowly, every skeleton moving step by step, I started to notice a shifting on the railing again. As Master Assembly itself began to move and turn and once more begin the production cycle. As it spiraled down, it shifted its momentum and once again moved to the very end, the area with all of the bodies placed around. And it picked some up and once more began depositing them into the actual lift. But with no skeletons currently positioned around to move the thing, it sort of just stood for a moment there for a little bit, waiting for other skeletons to return to move the bodies inside. And as they did, one of them, the one who collected the skulls, once more moved and then full body sprinted, running along the way, and then grabbing with all of its energy, slammed the cart that way as Master Assembly dropped it down back into the center of the cart. At which point, the skeleton moved and dragged it back along the way until eventually every single corpse was spilled down into the furnace, with no one, however, to pull the lever to dump the bodies back out. To fill that role, more of the skeletons began moving, heading on to the direction of the furnace to fulfill their unholy purpose. As I hear the shouts of Gartrinus and the movement of Strege turning my attention, I sort of peek through the crack.
As the skeleton approaches me, it reaches out its bony hands, and I simply move the shelf somewhat in front of him to block him a bit, so he cannot reach me.
As I noticed the skeletons move closer towards my ally, I did my best to assist. Not getting too close so I wasn't attacked in return. As I was carrying multiple bones of their allies, I flung a femur at them to see if it would distract in the narrow moment in between.
Two femurs tossed through the airs, winging out of Gartrinus' hands, impacting the skeleton, both of them scattering and almost causing the bones of the other skeleton to scatter against the ground in that moment.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Quat Oha performed elegantly. I bow.
Seeing an opportunity, I stepped forward, moved in with the stave, and managed to bring it down, attempting to slash against the head of the skeleton, cracking it open. There was a resounding impact as the stave came down, the crack forming as it was dazed for but a moment. I then pulled myself back and began to prepare myself for whatever return attack it gave me. Meanwhile, across the way, I heard the sounds of Strege fighting its own skeleton.
So, hearing, partially seeing through the cracks, Melanius having their own issues with skeletons, I swiftly decided to just push the shelf down on the two in front of her.
As I prepared once again, I heard the shifting of the shelf as Strege jammed into it, pushing it. And although being bolted to the ground, every single object shuddered and shifted as it spilled off down to the ground and slammed directly into the skeletons in front of me, crushing them both and smashing them to pieces beneath me.
I turned and pointed at Arcot. I aimed her vision up towards the ceiling. Arcot, if you look at the end of the track, right there, above where the furnace is, it comes to a halt. Master Assembly picks up speed and then slows down. Functionally, there's a break at the end of the track. Do you think you're the only person I know that could possibly aim a shot that well. Do you think you could fire the break off the end of the track?
Yeah, I think you could do that.
Can I borrow our dear friend down here? Our dear friend and future head of Master Assembly, doer and also maker.
What do you want from me?
I want you to take charge. I
am taking charge.
I want you to become the new Master Assembly.
Just me?
Just you.
I make things. I don't really clean materials or acquire materials.
But you make, right?
I am a maker.
You're about to make a new Master Assembly with you at the core.
I'm the greatest.
Taking advantage of the situation, I quickly rolled ahead, pulling Arcot with me. Plucking free our new wonderful skull friend, I dashed ahead and assumed my position at the lever.
While we were surrounded by the skeletons in the distance, Yayo and Arquette set up for their plan. Meanwhile, a bunch of bodies loaded into the incinerator. The Master Assembly shifted again. Calling out once more for its second protocol, it shifted down the way.
Cleanse materials.
Pulling its way back, it slowly goes to a stop, and then it shifted its way forward, plunging its way as quick as it could in the direction of the furnace. And it is that moment, calling out,
Master Assembly, plunge into the furnace!
The second I heard Master Assembly again properly intone the voice of the Lich, my default reaction was something almost... It was something that I'd grown used to over my years in the cave. A response from the Lich, that voice, resounding out. It made me grow quiet, still. It created the instinct to hide away. The Lich's voice represented trouble. But there was one surefire way to add credence to this. A call that resounded out. A call of the Goloins. A screech of utter terror. After all, the voice of the Lich was meant to cause fear in his subjects.
A screaming bellowed throughout. I peeked over the shelves to see what was going on, and I noticed Yayo screeching out from the far end of the room. A number of skeletons looked like they were pushing and pulling themselves. A golden skull was yelling out a command.
No, stop, stop, stop!
But it seemed as though the skeletons, autonomously following the orders, could not hear over the sound of a screaming Goloin, and instead continued moving for that moment. The emergency brakes on the chandelier began to engage themselves, but in that moment, a shot rang out through the air.
Always bet on the
A
goat!
single bead of
Always.
sweat dripped from my brow as I took a slow breath in tune with my bow and let the arrow loose. I don't miss.
Yes.
The arrow sang through the air. A brake was impacted, and a screeching turned into a loud howl as the chandelier flung itself in, and you could see Master Assembly's entire form plunge in as Yayo pulled the lever, and the chandelier came off its hinges and flew into the furnace itself, plunging itself into the fiery depths beneath. A number of skeletons burned as you could see ash as the flame itself and the entire thing began to coil. As Yayo pulled the lever back again, trapping Master Assembly inside, incinerating it to ash. A number of the other skeletons continued to move for a moment as they stood there, watching for a bit, and began to continue closing in on the others down beneath. And then, a thud. A secondary thud, smashing against the door of the iron furnace. A third thud, the entire thing shaking, moving rapidly and beginning to break to pieces. A bolt flies off the edge. As a cindering remain flies out, the door smashing open in that moment, fire licking at the form as the thing rolls out, a skeleton lost, golden skulls melting, but still autonomous, still with purpose. Every single being within Master Assembly shifted its focus. No longer attached to the rail, emergency protocols had been activated. Licking with flame, the thing sort of pulled itself out and began to shift. This spinning wheel of fire began moving directly down the path. It began to spiral forward for a bit until eventually it reached the center of the hall and it skid, the entire chandelier shifting its momentum for a moment as it twisted and turned its way in direction forward towards us. Us down here and the other skeletons. As it shifted once again, it began to turn and whip itself around. Whipping around the corner, it barely managed to pull itself loose until eventually, arcing itself up, it began a full-body charge at us, the chandelier breaking through everything in its path. As it did that, I noticed the skeleton rolling around inside reach out a hand, holding a skull which then tried to spoke an incantation, but it was silent. The pylons hanging above there seemed to simply just wait in absence. No sound, no response, already disabled, no defensive measures were able to be activated. And instead, left with no other option, the broken wheel began spinning forward and smashing its way upon them. I heard the sound of cracking bones, breaking shelves, and the sound of my companions screaming as it rolled past the way. After spinning that way, I had thought perhaps the beast would be done. But as it moved by, the skeleton riding on the side, wielding a scimitar, swished down, cutting into Strege as it moved across the way. Strege barely managed to duck down beneath the two cabinets there as the scimitar slided across, causing sparks on the metal surface of those cabinets to spark out throughout the room for a moment. It then impacted on the chain, waited on it for a moment, and then was pulled back by the weight and the tension and brought back as the wheel began slowly spinning again. But that was not all for us, as the skeletons began moving down. Strege, already positioned, manages to pull away from the skeletons as they keep on moving down, a whole swarm bringing their way closer and closer to us. The ones near me began to try to scale their way around the different crates assembled, pulling themselves as close as they could to try to get at me. Each one grabbing up some broken piece of wood or something else they could find, a bone, and swinging at me, attempting to crush me under the weight of multiple furious attacks. I barely dodged the first blow. As the next one came, I continued to the best of my abilities to dodge. Managing to avoid the first two, the final one came in for a sweep and managed to rake me across the back with a bone. I didn't feel much of a pain, however, when it did that. Sort of just rebounding, I continued to take the blows and shift my position around. And then, the counterattack came from my two companions.
Skeletons behind me, skeletons in front of me. There are skeletons everywhere. I think after this, I don't want to see another skeleton for the rest of my life, but in this dungeon, I don't think I'm going to be that lucky. So, the only existing answer is just skeleton on skeleton violence, I guess, as I grab one of the skeletons that is attacking me and wonder how many times I can write down skeletons. So, simply the skeleton was simply kind of tilted over because of his friend running through this area, and I grabbed him and just swung him, and he kind of just lazily walked into the wheel himself, getting caught in it.
The wheel began to jam, more skeletons filling inside as it began to bin and spin out of control. The extra weight caused it to tilt on the chain ever so briefly until eventually the thing crashed down, breaking a few more skeletal bones within the form until eventually all of the arms underneath lifted up, pushed itself rightly, and tried to once more begin the process of spinning.
Emboldened by Strege's valiance in this endeavor and wanting to make sure that this thing couldn't hurt anybody else, I looked to the remaining bones in my hand, and, well, I did the best I could.
As bones were plunged into the depths of the wheel, it seemed to twist and crack a bit more as eventually one of the lines that was holding it snaps entirely and the entire thing becomes uneven. The whole form of it seems to shift and start wheeling its way in every which direction. Finally, I noticed that other skeleton began marching its way up, sort of moving to the back, stepping on a circle, and then finding its way slowly approaching. It seemed like it was going to help me, but I couldn't quite tell. Its multiple segmented body seemed to be shifting and shaking from the number of wounds it had taken previously. I couldn't really pay much attention to that, though, however, as the wheel began to move again.
Absolutely shocked by the state of affairs, I quickly gathered myself. Wait, this is still a good thing. Certainly, the golden skulls began to run, turning almost into a waxy substance. Now it's simply a skeleton that's out of control. The assembly part, that's no longer a risk, and I looked down at the skeleton clutched in my hands. He's the maker, huh?
As Yayo moved back, you could hear the sound of an internal mechanism opening, a shelf moving. Even though the door was busted open, some type of compartment inside the furnace opened up, and a bunch of bones spilled out, freshly charred.
I quickly darted past, wedging my way through. I grabbed one of the bodies and looked over to the Whisper. You said you aren't good at gathering, right? So I will do the gathering for you. You do the making.
I understand.
Together, we are the new Master Assembly.
I am the master. I am the maker. I am the assembly. I am the master. I am the maker. I am the assembly.
I sprint by, holding a body over my head, skeleton chanting.
Wow, she's really into it.
Running while carrying things is hard.
I shall watch my magic.
Suddenly, I could see it. The body that was in Yayo's hand began to shift. as it started to peel itself back together and pull itself into the form of a skeleton. And then, almost immediately, without any binding, all of the bones seemed to fall to pieces.
What?
Fully animated, every single individual bone began rolling its way forward across the field of battle like a moving, springing corpse of bones. It couldn't move far, but the skull was almost hopping its way along as it sort of pulled itself by, a sort of connection pulling, and then the skull eventually let loose from the actual body itself and started rolling on its own, leaving the rest of the skeleton behind. It began to roll, and eventually, the other skeleton seemed to pick it up, putting it on its shoulder, creating a second head jutting out from the spine, somewhat restoring some of its vitality to a degree.
Whoa, that's
Oh,
incredible,
boy.
actually. You are a good... I'll start running my way back over and I'll do it again.
After Yayo's display of necromancy, I found myself rather at a loss for what to do. As I kept trying to swing my stave, it was much harder to fight now. The arm that had turned to bone was hardly responsive to my commands. It felt like I was acting with only a very few number of my actual joints to my ability. I had to mostly rely on the hand with flesh to swing, and with so many opponents, I couldn't really find any use for that. So instead, I decided to maybe mimic a tactic I had learned previously. After hearing the voice once again call out before, I moved back, pulled myself closer to Master Assembly, or what was left of it, and I sort of crawled my way through as it began to right itself. And I suppose out of some form of curiosity, I sort of jumped inside of it. I pulled myself inside, and it seemed that the skeletons once again, at least these ones, didn't really recognize me as a threat. Using my bone arm first, I pulled myself inside and began spinning along rapidly. I felt the multiple bones impacting and pressing against me, but all the same, I pulled my way forward. I found one of the golden skulls that was actually still there. Effective. It was calling out,
Assemble! Break them apart! All skeleton forces, please!
melting as its words were sort of plunged to pieces. I reached over with my working hand, clenched down, and simply pulled. Pulling as hard as I could, I ripped what was left, really not feeling the burning heat of the fire or the melting on my fingers. I simply ripped them back and then launched them off, tossing the skull down into the pit. There's a shift in Master Assembly in that moment. The entire form began to move ever so briefly, and then I called out to Yayo as loud as I could, "Yayo! Make that skull talk!"
Okay. Well, you made it. Why don't you try to give out some orders? You're moving up in the world.
All skeletons, gaze upon my genius!
At that moment, I felt a shift. As still caught inside this ball of skeletons and the shifting force, I began to pull myself forward. All the skeletons assembled inside of it, moving up, and then eventually, once they were assembled all together, the wheels began to crumble, falling to pieces as it disassembled itself, and in its place, a number of skeletons crawled and sprung themselves up, pulling themselves out, to which I was the center of. I felt a bit smudged, as surrounding me, every skeleton in the arena suddenly stopped.
All skeletons, hear me! I am the great maker! I am the doer! I am the crafter! I am the one who talks! I am the one who makes you listen! I am the great lich! I am the maker! I am the one who talks!
He continued on that like a broken record. Whispers weren't the most intelligent of beings, but this one seemed to be egged on rather well. I looked over and gazed for a moment at Yayo, seeing the cleverness behind those eyes for manipulating a whole situation like this. It seemed as though the entire assembly room had gone silent, watching on a center stage where she stood with the strange speaking whisper.
Okay. So why don't you give them an order, Your Greatness, the new Master Assembly?
New order! Kill them all!
Yeah.
They say it's been too long. It's so nice to see you. You're a good friend of mine. So long farewell at you. No, I can't believe, oh no, not words from thee, but said in facsimile, yearning for that distant we. So I'm searching for near eternity, but I don't know off branch, no family tree, no friends I have to see. An unfriendly propensity is my natural state to take flight in perpetuity. And so echo back is only me, cut off from preciously.
I heard one more crumble, the sound of another tower going down.
Damn,
Back it
bro.
up. Back it up. Back it up.
The second time.
Okay, hang on. Back it up.
Right.
Back it. Okay. I heard it. I heard a crumbling sound.